I caught my wife cheating after 30 years of marriage, and instead of it tearing us apart, it brought us closer than ever. So close, in fact, that her lover now lives with us. Imagine waking up every day next to the woman you love, knowing she's in love with another man too, and somehow you're not just okay with it, you love it. This is the story of how I went from betrayed husband to part of an unconventional Swedish family that's unlike anything you could ever imagine. All right, this is going to be a bit of a winding story, but I guess that's what happens when your whole life gets flipped on its head after 3 decades. Bear with me. Let's take it back. I'll lay out the pieces of this puzzle, and we can get into how it all crumbled. So, I met Lisa when we were both in our 20s, fresh out of college. She was my world back then, smart, witty, beautiful. We started off with big dreams, the kind of stuff everyone imagines when they're young. I was a software engineer, riding the tech wave as it started booming in the 90s. She was a teacher, kindergarten specifically. Always said she loved kids, but didn't want any of her own. That should have been a flag, I guess, but it didn't seem odd at the time. Our life was pretty solid, or so I thought. I worked long hours, climbing the corporate ladder. I ended up at a big tech firm, putting in 60-hour weeks, managing teams, going to conferences, basically living the workaholic dream. It paid off financially, though. We bought a house in a nice neighborhood, nothing too extravagant but comfortable. She had her classroom, and I had my career. We weren't rolling in money, but we didn't struggle either. We didn't have kids, which suited both of us. Or maybe it suited her more than it did me. I think deep down I wanted them, but I convinced myself that what we had was enough. I traveled a lot for work, and Lisa had her own thing going on. She was always busy with her students, PDA meetings, volunteering for school events. I thought it was admirable, her dedication to her job. What I didn't realize was that all that free time I thought she was using for work or school events. She was spending it with him. Now, him, her ex. That's where the cracks were. See, I knew about him, of course. Everyone's got an ex, right? She mentioned him casually when we first started dating, made it seem like it was some long-forgotten thing. High school sweetheart, typical story. They dated through college, then drifted apart when they got into the real world. I didn't think much of it. She swore they were done, that he was part of her past. I don't know exactly when they reconnected. Maybe they never really disconnected in the first place. But looking back, I can see it now. The random text messages, her going out with old friends more often, coming back with that look in her eyes like she had some secret she was never going to share. I didn't push. I trusted her blindly, stupidly. I figured after 25 years of marriage, we had a bond that couldn't be broken. Turns out, I was just being naive. We had a comfortable life, though. That's what everyone said. Our friends would come over for barbecues, and they'd tell me how lucky I was. We traveled sometimes, weekend trips, a couple of vacations to Europe, nothing extravagant. She loved France, especially Paris. Looking back now, I wonder if he was ever there with us in her mind, maybe in some parallel life where she wasn't married to me. Our routines were ordinary, I guess. I'd wake up early, get ready for work while she had her slow mornings with her coffee and the news. She had this little ritual, sitting on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Sometimes I'd join her, but most days I was rushing out the door, always running late, always thinking work was the most important thing. Lisa and I were good, though, or so I thought. We laughed, we argued sometimes, but never anything serious. I mean, we weren't the type to fight over petty stuff. Weekends were for us, or that's how it seemed. She'd go off to see friends, sometimes those girly weekends she always planned. Turns out, those weren't exactly girls' weekends. Not all of them, anyway. I found out later that some of those were excuses, little windows of time where she'd slip away to see him. Then one day the dam broke. I wasn't even looking for anything, but her phone was sitting on the counter, and a text popped up. I glanced, not thinking much of it, but it was his name. I knew it. From way back. That ex. And it wasn't some friendly message. It was intimate. I don't even want to get into what it said, but let's just say it left no doubt. I confronted her that night, and she just froze. I don't think she expected me to ever find out, or maybe she didn't care anymore. When I pressed, that's when it all came out. The whole damn story. They never really stopped seeing each other. They had this on-again, off-again thing for all these years, and I was the fool caught in the middle. She said it wasn't like they were always together, just every now and then, whenever he was back in town. Apparently, he never married. She said she loved me, that she still does, but that it was complicated. Complicated? I didn't know what to feel at that moment. Betrayal? Rage? I just went numb. 30 years of my life, and the whole time she had this secret. I can't even explain what that does to a person. To realize you were second choice, a backup plan for someone who was living a double life. I gave her everything: loyalty, stability, a home. I thought we were in it together. Turns out I was the only one playing by the rules. I'm still figuring out what happens next. Divorce seems like the obvious answer, but it's not that simple after 30 years. It's like untangling a lifetime. It's messy. It's raw. And I'm just here trying to make sense of how everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be a lie. Let's dig a little deeper. So Lisa and her ex, John, that's where it really starts, I guess. Their relationship was the definition of on again, off again, always filled with drama. From what I pieced together after everything came out, they had that kind of love that burns hot, but also burns out. They were high school sweethearts, followed each other to college, but it was always volatile. You know the type, constant fighting, big makeups, then right back into another breakup. He was the kind of guy who couldn't commit to anything, too busy chasing whatever wild dream was in his head. Lisa used to talk about him a bit when we first got together. She made it sound like she was over it, like they'd outgrown each other, but in hindsight, I see that maybe she was never really over him. She said they were both just too different. He was unpredictable. She was looking for stability. That's where I came in. By the time they broke up for good, it was apparently one of those messy, final kind of splits. She'd had enough of the chaos. She wanted someone who could give her a normal life, something stable. She wanted the white picket fence, not the whirlwind that John brought into her life. At least, that's what she said. So, we met not long after that final breakup. She was still in her early 20s, trying to piece herself back together after the roller coaster that was her relationship with him. And me? I was in a pretty good place, just started a new job as a software developer. Life was looking up. I was never the dramatic type. My life was more about routines, structure. I was a logical guy, grounded, and I guess that's what she found appealing after years of emotional whiplash with him. We hit it off pretty fast. I think she liked that I wasn't all over the place like he was. She'd tell me stories about the things he used to do, going off the grid for days, leaving her wondering where the hell he was, only to show up with some half-baked excuse. I couldn't imagine treating someone like that. I was always the type to check in, be considerate, and she responded to that. At least it seemed like she did. We fell into a relationship quickly, and within a year, we were married. Now looking back, I think I was the calm after the storm for her. She wanted to settle down, and I offered exactly what she was craving at the time. No drama, no games, just stability. I was that guy who wouldn't leave her hanging, who would come home every night and be reliable. And at least on the surface, it worked. I remember thinking she seemed a bit guarded sometimes, like there was always this part of her I couldn't quite reach. She never talked much about her past after we got serious. I chalked it up to her just wanting to leave that chapter behind, and I respected that. Everyone's got their baggage, right? So I didn't push. Meanwhile, my career was taking off. Tech was booming, and I was right in the middle of it. I started working more and more, climbing the ladder at this big firm, going from developer to team lead, then into management. Long hours, lots of travel, but I was doing it for us. I wanted to give her the life she deserved. Nice house, nice things, vacations. I figured that's what a good husband did. I didn't realize that maybe I was creating a gap, one that he would eventually slip back into. Lisa kept busy with her teaching job, throwing herself into her work. She loved kids, but like I mentioned before, she didn't want any of her own. At the time, I convinced myself I was okay with that. We had a full life, good friends, weekends away, time for each other. Or at least I thought we did. But then, there were always those little things I didn't really notice until later. The nights out with friends, the occasional weekend trips where she said she was visiting family or meeting up with old college buddies. I now know that some of those were meetups with John. The first time it happened, I imagine it was something like a rekindling of old flames. Maybe they ran into each other by accident. Or maybe not. She never gave me the full story, just bits and pieces when everything came crashing down. But I can picture it. Seeing him again after all those years, thinking back to the highs of their relationship, forgetting for a moment all the lows. She probably told herself it was a one-time thing. A mistake. That's what people do, right? Rationalize the hell out of something that should have been a red flag. But it wasn't a one-time thing. It became this pattern. Whenever he was back in town, they'd find a way to see each other. Sometimes it was just a quick rendezvous. Other times it was more involved. Weekends, nights she claimed to be with her friends. And all this time, I'm thinking we've got this solid life. I'm thinking I'm the guy who finally gave her the stability she was looking for, the guy who helped her escape the chaos of her past. And maybe in a way I was, but it was never enough to completely erase him from her life. John was always there, lurking in the background, this unfinished business she could never fully let go of. He was like that ghost from her past who kept coming back, and I was just too blind to see it. I wonder now if she ever really loved me the way I thought she did, or if I was just the safety net, stable, predictable, the guy she could count on while she chased the thrill of him. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? The thrill of what they had, the rush of those passionate highs they shared, even if it came with all the toxic lows. And I never even saw it happening. So yeah, her relationship with him was messy, unstable, and filled with drama. But even in all that mess, he had a piece of her that I never did. And now I'm left trying to figure out where that leaves me after all these years. Yeah, there were a few moments over the years where something didn't quite sit right, but I pushed them aside. Hindsight really is 2020. At the time, I didn't see the bigger picture, but now I can't stop thinking about those little clues, those strange situations where I almost caught her. One in particular stands out, clear as day now that I know the truth. It must have been, 15 years ago? Maybe more. We were in our early 40s, right in the middle of that comfortable phase of marriage. I was traveling a lot for work, but I was back home for a stretch, trying to be more present. I remember it was a random Thursday night. Lisa had said she was going out with some friends from school, the usual dinner and wine kind of thing. She wasn't much of a partier, but she did like her social time. I didn't think much of it. Like I said, I trusted her. But I remember her being a little off that day, distracted, almost anxious, which wasn't like her. She left the house around 6, all dressed up, nicer than usual for just a dinner with friends. I noticed it, but I didn't comment. She said it was a special occasion, or something like that. I was tired from a long day of work, so I didn't ask too many questions. I settled into the couch with a beer and started watching a game. A few hours passed, and it was around 10:30 when I realized she wasn't back yet. That wasn't totally unusual, but I remember something nagging at me. I texted her, just a casual, "Hey, how's it going? You heading home soon?" No response. Again, not that weird. Maybe they were still deep into their night out. But then I started getting this gut feeling, this itch in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. By midnight, she still wasn't home. I texted again. Nothing. I tried calling, went straight to voicemail. That was weird. Lisa wasn't the type to ignore her phone. My mind started spinning. Maybe something happened. Maybe there was an accident. I started getting a little panicked. I called a couple of her friends, but no one picked up. I ended up sitting on the couch, wide awake, staring at the door, waiting for her to come home. It must have been around 1:30 in the morning when I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway. I got up, pretending like I hadn't been waiting for hours. When she walked in, I could tell something was off. Her hair was a little messy, her face flushed like she'd been rushing or, I don't know, doing something more than having dinner with friends. I asked, "Everything okay? You're pretty late." She froze for just a second, barely noticeable, but I saw it. And then she smiled, this tight, practiced smile, and said, "Yes, sorry. We ended up having a few too many glasses of wine, and I didn't realize how late it was. My phone died. I couldn't even call to let you know." It sounded plausible enough, but there was this feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something didn't add up. I asked her which friend she was with, and she rattled off the usual names. She wasn't stumbling drunk or anything, but she seemed, I don't know, off balance in a different way. I brushed it off, though. What was I supposed to do? Accuse my wife of something based on a late night and a dead phone? But here's the kicker. A couple of days later, I bumped into one of those friends she'd mentioned at the grocery store. I casually asked her how their dinner was the other night, and she gave me this confused look, like she had no idea what I was talking about. Turns out, there was no dinner. That friend hadn't seen Lisa in weeks. I remember my stomach dropping right then. But again, I didn't want to believe it. I made up some excuse in my head. Maybe Lisa had meant different friends. Maybe there was a mix-up. When I asked her about it later, she just laughed it off, saying she'd been with another group of school friends and that I must have gotten confused. She made me feel like I was being paranoid, like I was the one overthinking things. She had this way of smoothing things over, making me doubt myself. And I let it go. I trusted her. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who interrogates his wife over every little thing. So I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to believe her because the alternative, well, that would have blown everything up back then, and I wasn't ready for that. Now I realize what was really going on. That wasn't a girl's night out. That was her sneaking off to see John. It all fits. The dead phone, the strange excuses, the fact that she didn't come home until way past midnight. She was with him that night, and I was too blind or too trusting to see it. Looking back, I feel like an idiot for not catching on, but I guess that's what happens when you're in deep like that. You see what you want to see, and you ignore the rest. But man, now that I know, it all makes sense. That was just one of the close calls. God knows how many more times there were that I missed entirely. Yeah, that trip to the Bahamas, man, I can't believe I fell for that one. That was one of those big, how could I have been so blind? Moments when everything finally unraveled. Funny how you can convince yourself of something so easily when you trust someone like I trusted Lisa. It was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, right around the time things were getting weird between us, but I didn't have the slightest clue as to why. Lisa had been acting a little distant, but I chalked it up to life getting in the way. I was still working long hours, trying to keep up with the demands of my job, and I figured we were just in one of those phases where couples drift a bit, but eventually come back together. You don't think 25 years of marriage can be completely blown up by a solo vacation, but well, it did. So, here's how it went down. Lisa had been talking for months about needing a break, needing time for herself. She said work had been stressful. Her classroom was chaos, and she needed to decompress. I got that. I wasn't exactly good at taking time off myself, so I figured it was healthy for her to go. She suggested a solo trip to the Bahamas. Nothing too fancy, just a week to unwind, sit by the beach, and find herself again. I thought it was a little strange, her going by herself when we could have easily gone together, but I didn't question it. She said she needed space, and I didn't want to come across as controlling or clingy. After all, everyone deserves some alone time, right? She booked the trip, showed me the details, even gave me the dates. Everything seemed legit. She left with a suitcase full of bikinis and beach books, kissed me goodbye, and promised a text when she got there. And she did. Or at least she sent a couple of texts. Short messages about how beautiful the water was, how the resort was perfect for relaxing, how she was going to spend the day lounging by the pool with a drink in hand. I didn't think much of it. I was busy with work as usual, and the week went by quickly. She called once or twice, said the reception was spotty, but that she was having a great time. Then, when she got back, she brought me this nice souvenir, a little hand-carved turtle from some local shop, and showed me a few pictures on her phone of sunsets and palm trees. Everything seemed normal. She seemed relaxed, refreshed, and I figured the trip had done her good. But now, fast forward to when I caught her cheating. That moment when I saw the text from John, the one that blew everything wide open. After I confronted her, and the truth started spilling out, that's when she finally admitted that she hadn't been alone on that trip. She'd been with him. She told me, all casual-like, as if it was something I should have known all along. Apparently, John had reached out a few months before the trip, and they started talking again. It had started innocently enough, or so she said, just catching up, reminiscing about the past. But things escalated quickly, like they always did with him, and next thing I knew, she had decided to meet him in the Bahamas. That solo trip was just a cover for her to sneak away with him, to pick up where they left off all those years ago. I remember sitting there, listening to her confess this, feeling like my entire world was crashing down. She went on about how it was just a week, how she had needed to sort out her feelings, and how she thought getting away with John would somehow help her figure out what she wanted. Like that was supposed to make me feel better. She said they'd had this intense, emotional week together, and that it was closure for her. Like she needed to see him one last time to finally move on. Closure? That's what she called it. Except it wasn't closure, because she kept seeing him after that. It wasn't some farewell tour. It was a full-blown affair. And that trip was just one chapter in their story that I'd been oblivious to for years. I think back now to how easily she lied to me during that trip. She had it all figured out, the fake texts, the fake pictures. Hell, she even brought me that damn turtle as a souvenir, like that was supposed to make everything seem legit. And I believed it all. I didn't question a thing. I didn't want to really. I wanted to believe that she was just a woman who needed a break. Not someone who was sneaking off to rekindle things with her ex while I sat at home working my ass off for our life together. There were little things, too, that should have clued me in, like when she came back and seemed a little too distant, like her mind was still somewhere else. She didn't talk much about the trip, didn't show me a ton of photos. But when I asked, she said she just wanted to keep it as her own little peaceful memory. And again, I let it slide. Now I realized that was guilt. That was her trying to cover her tracks, to keep that part of her life hidden from me. The whole time, I was the fool, believing every lie, trusting every word she said. It's crazy to think that while I was sitting at home, missing her, thinking she was off enjoying a solo retreat, she was with him. They were walking those beaches together, having romantic dinners, probably laughing at how easily she was pulling it all off. And me? I was the sucker who didn't even see it coming. That trip to the Bahamas was one of those moments that I'll never forget now. It was a turning point, one of the many times she almost got caught but managed to wriggle out of it. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even after years of lies. And when it did, it hit me like a freight train. That was the moment I realized how deep this thing with John really went, how far back it stretched, and how many times she'd looked me in the eye and lied through her teeth. The Bahamas was just one piece of the puzzle, but it was a big one. Now, it's like all those moments of doubt over the years have come flooding back, and I can't help but wonder how many other trips, how many other nights, were really just more lies. Yeah, that night when everything came out, it felt like my world shattered. After I saw that message on her phone, John's name lighting up the screen with some words I could never unsee, I confronted her immediately. My hands were shaking, my head was spinning, but I kept my voice calm. I just said, "Who is this, Lisa?" But we both knew. I didn't have to explain what I was talking about. She froze for a second, like she wasn't expecting to get caught that night. And then the floodgates opened. It was almost like she had been waiting for this moment, for the chance to finally let it all out. I think she was exhausted from keeping this secret for so long. And now that I had the proof right in front of me, there was no more wriggling out. No more excuses, no more lies. Just the truth, raw and ugly. She sat down on the couch, looking defeated, and I could tell this wasn't going to be some quick sorry, I'll never talk to him again kind of conversation. There was too much history behind this. So I asked her straight up, "How long has this been going on?" And that's when she told me everything. 30 years of marriage, and she'd been seeing him, off and on, the whole time. She started from the beginning, explaining how she had reconnected with him not long after we got married. At first, it was just innocent catch-ups, but old feelings resurfaced, and things escalated quickly. Over the years, whenever he was back in town, or whenever she had the opportunity, they would meet. That Bahamas trip? Yeah, she admitted it too. She wasn't alone on that beach. She was with him. The weight of all those lies, of all those years she had been living a double life, just came crashing down on me. I remember staring at her, barely able to comprehend it all. "You've been with him the whole time?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, and then she said the thing that really knocked the wind out of me. "I love you both," she whispered, like that was supposed to make things better. "I love you both, but in different ways. You have to understand, it's not the same kind of love. I love you, really I do. You've been my rock, my partner. I couldn't have gotten through life without you. You're the one who's always been there for me. I need you. I don't want to lose you." She paused, wiping away a tear, and I just sat there in shock, barely able to process what she was saying. But then she continued, and I could feel my heart breaking more with every word. "But with John, it's different. It's always been this. I don't know, this pull. It's passion. It's chaos. And I know it's wrong, but it's something I can't walk away from. I've tried. So many times I've tried to stop, but I keep going back to him. And it doesn't mean I love you any less. I love him too." She said it like she was caught in the middle of some great tragic love triangle, like I was supposed to understand that somehow it was possible for her to love two people at once. And the worst part was I could see she was being honest. She wasn't lying to me anymore. She wasn't trying to wriggle out of it this time. She was laying her heart bare, telling me the raw truth that she had been carrying for decades. I was quiet for a long time, just staring at her. I could feel the anger bubbling up, the betrayal twisting in my gut, but mostly I just felt numb. "So, what now?" I finally asked, my voice barely steady. "You're telling me you love both of us, but what do you expect me to do with that? You want me to just accept it?" That's when she looked at me, and her answer hit me like a ton of bricks. "I don't want to divorce you. I can't. I need you in my life. You're my husband, my best friend. But I don't want to stop seeing him either." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, after all the lies and the betrayal, she was standing there, asking me to let her keep both of us, To somehow be okay with the fact that she'd been cheating for 30 years and planned to keep it that way. It was like she didn't understand the depth of the pain she was causing, or maybe she did, but she couldn't help herself. I know it sounds crazy, she said, her voice breaking, but I can't let go of either of you. I love you in different ways, and I need both of those parts of my life. I don't want to hurt you, but I don't know how to stop. Can't we just find a way to make this work? I stared at her, speechless. What was she even asking? For me to share her? To just be okay with her sneaking off to see him while still being married to me? The audacity of it all left me breathless. I was angry, heartbroken, disgusted, but mostly I was confused. This wasn't the Lisa I thought I knew. Or maybe it was, and I just never saw her for who she really was. I remember standing up, my legs feeling shaky. I can't believe this, I said, running a hand through my hair. You're asking me to be okay with this? After 30 years of lies? After everything we've built? She didn't answer right away, just sat there with tears running down her face. She wasn't trying to manipulate me anymore. She wasn't making excuses. She was just there, raw and broken, knowing she'd torn everything apart but still somehow hoping I'd understand. I don't want to lose you, she whispered again. But I don't want to lose him either. I walked out of the room that night without saying another word. I couldn't stay there, couldn't look at her. I went for a long drive, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just said. She loved me, but she loved him too. She didn't want to choose, didn't want to stop the affair, and somehow she expected me to live with that. That next month was the longest of my life. After that night, when everything came crashing down, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in the house with her. I needed space to think, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town, just a temporary place while I tried to wrap my head around everything. The nights were the worst. Lying there alone, replaying every moment of our life together. All those memories now tainted by the realization that she'd been seeing him all along. I'd always imagined that if something like this happened, I'd be able to cut ties and move on. But reality isn't that simple. 30 years with someone, it doesn't just disappear. I realized I still loved her, even after everything. I didn't know what that said about me, if I was just weak, desperate, or if love really was that complicated. Maybe it was all of the above. I spent hours every night going over it all. And despite the anger, the betrayal, and the confusion, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I didn't want to lose her. As much as it hurt, as much as she had broken my trust, the idea of being without her, that hurt even more. She was still my person, the one I'd built my life with. I knew her better than anyone, and despite this massive betrayal, part of me still wanted to believe there was a way forward. Maybe it was stupid, maybe it was naive, but I couldn't shake it. We didn't talk much during that month. I needed space, and so did she. A few text messages here and there, just checking in on each other. She didn't pressure me, didn't push for anything, which I appreciated. She knew I was wrestling with everything, and I think she needed time too. But the silence made me miss her. Every day apart made me realize just how much of my life was tied up with hers. I missed the little things, the way she laughed at stupid jokes, the way she knew how to calm me down when I was stressed, the way we used to sit on the porch together, not saying much, just enjoying each other's company. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. One day, after weeks of thinking, I texted her, told her we needed to talk. We met up at a small cafe, neutral ground. It was awkward at first, seeing her after all that time. She looked tired, worn down. I imagine I didn't look much better. We sat there, sipping our coffees, not really knowing how to start. Finally, I just said it. I've been thinking a lot. I told her, my voice shaky. About everything. About us. About him. And I love you, Lisa. Even after all of this, I still love you. I don't know what that says about me, but I do. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and guilt. She didn't say anything, just let me continue. I don't want to lose you. I can't imagine my life without you. But I also can't ignore what you told me, what you need. And I'm trying to figure out if there's a way for us to make this work. Somehow. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try. I just can't go back to the way things were, with you sneaking around behind my back. If we're going to do this, it has to be open, honest. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and whispered, I don't want to lose you either. I never did. I know I hurt you, and I know I can't take that back, but I don't want to give up on us. We sat in silence for a while, both of us taking in what we were saying. Then I dropped the bombshell that had been sitting in the back of my mind for weeks. "I want to meet him," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Lisa's eyes widened in surprise. She wasn't expecting that. Hell, I wasn't even sure I was expecting to say it until the words came out. But it was the only way I could see things moving forward. If we're going to do this, I need to meet him. I need to know who this guy is, the man who's been part of your life for all these years. I can't live in the dark anymore. She looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. I could see her mind racing, trying to process what I'd just said. Finally, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "If that's what you need, we can do that. I'll talk to him, and we'll set something up." It wasn't an easy decision for me. The idea of sitting down with the man who had been my wife's lover for decades. It felt surreal, like something out of a bad movie. But I needed it. I needed to put a face to the name, to confront this ghost that had been haunting my marriage for so long. A few days later, Lisa called me. She'd talked to John, and he was willing to meet. We agreed on neutral ground again, some restaurant on the outskirts of town, a place neither of us had been before. I remember the day of the meeting. My stomach was in knots. I didn't know what to expect, didn't know what I would say or how I would react. I just knew I had to do this. When I walked into the restaurant, Lisa was already there, sitting at a table near the back. And then there he was, John. He looked normal. Just a guy in his late 50s, graying at the temples, dressed casually, looking a little uncomfortable himself. It was strange. For so long, I had built him up in my head as this shadowy figure, this villain in my marriage, but seeing him in person, he was just a man who had been part of Lisa's life for just as long as I had. I sat down across from them, my heart pounding in my chest. The tension was thick. Nobody spoke for a while, and I could feel both of them watching me, waiting for me to start. Finally, I broke the silence. "So," I said, looking directly at John, "you've been with my wife for 30 years. He didn't flinch, just nodded. "I have," he said quietly, his voice steady but full of something like regret. "I know this situation is beyond complicated. I know I've hurt you, and I'm not here to make excuses for that. But I love her too." Hearing him say that felt like a punch to the gut, but I held it together. "And you're okay with this?" I asked. "With the fact that she's married to me?" He looked down, taking a deep breath. "I've accepted it. I've had to. It's not ideal. It's not what I wanted, but I've learned to live with it. I don't want to take her away from you. I never did." It was a surreal conversation, sitting there with the man who had been in Lisa's life almost as long as I had, both of us loving the same woman in different ways. I didn't know what I was expecting from that meeting, but I walked away with a strange sense of understanding. Not peace, not by a long shot, but understanding. After that conversation with John, everything started to shift in a way I never could have expected. I walked into that meeting filled with tension and anger, but when I left, there was this strange sense of clarity. I don't know if it was closure or if it was just the reality settling in, but something changed that day. John wasn't the villain I had built him up to be in my head. He was just another guy caught in the same mess as me. And if Lisa loved him, in her own complicated way, maybe there was something to this that I hadn't been open to before. In the days after, I found myself thinking about them a lot. At first, it was uncomfortable picturing them together, imagining the moments they shared that I had never been a part of. But then, something unexpected happened. The more I thought about it, the more excited I got. It was weird, no doubt about it. There was this mix of jealousy, curiosity, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was almost like the idea of them together was becoming this strange, forbidden fantasy that I couldn't shake. And for whatever reason, I started to like it. I didn't tell Lisa at first. I kept those thoughts to myself, unsure if I was losing my mind or if this was some kind of bizarre coping mechanism. But then one night, after she came back from one of her dates with John, everything clicked. She walked through the door, and there was this energy about her. She was glowing almost. It wasn't just the usual "I had a good night" kind of vibe. It was different, more intense. And I knew, without her saying a word, that she'd been with him. At first, that old familiar knot of jealousy tightened in my stomach. But instead of letting it consume me, something shifted. I found myself looking at her in a way I hadn't in years. She looked alive, vibrant, like she'd been reignited somehow. And I couldn't help but be drawn to her in a way that was primal, almost electric. I remember pulling her close, feeling the heat of the night still lingering on her skin, and asking her how her night was. She hesitated at first, like she wasn't sure how much I wanted to know, but then she saw the look in my eyes and smiled. This sly, knowing smile. She told me she'd had a great time, and I could feel the tension building between us. Instead of pulling away, I leaned into it. We didn't even make it to the bedroom before things got intense. That night, everything was different. Hotter, more passionate, more raw than it had been in years. There was this weird thrill to it, this excitement that came from knowing where she'd been, who she'd been with. It was like we were tapping into something new, something we'd never explored before. And it wasn't just that night. Every time she went out with him, I found myself thinking about them together. The more I thought about it, the more it turned me on. It was strange, yeah, but it was also exhilarating. I started looking forward to those nights, imagining them together while she was out. And then, when she came back, we'd have these incredible nights that were better than anything we'd had in years. It was like this whole new layer to our relationship had opened up, something exciting, something dangerous, but also something that brought us closer in a weird way. Eventually, she noticed. She saw the way I reacted when she came home, the way I seemed more energized, more turned on by the whole situation. One night, after one of our best nights together, she looked at me, still catching her breath, and said, "You like this, don't you?" I froze for a second, not sure how to answer. But then I realized I couldn't hide it anymore. Yeah, I admitted, my voice low. "It's different, but I like it. I don't know why, but it turns me on." She smiled, that same knowing smile, and then leaned in, kissing me softly. "I had a feeling," she said, running her fingers through my hair. "You've been different lately. More open." We lay there in the dark for a while, just talking, and that's when she made the suggestion that changed everything. "What if," she said slowly, "the next time we all got together, the three of us? I think it could be interesting." I remember my heart skipping a beat. The idea of all three of us in the same room. It was wild, something I never would have considered in a million years. But now, after everything, the thought of it wasn't as crazy as it once would have been. It was intriguing, exciting, and part of me wanted to see where it would lead. I looked at her, trying to gauge if she was serious, and she just smiled, her eyes twinkling with that familiar, mischievous glint. "I'm serious," she said, her voice soft but certain. "I think it could be good for us, all of us. No more secrets, just honesty. We can explore this together." I didn't answer right away. I needed time to process what she was suggesting. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Our relationship had already shifted in ways I never could have imagined, and somehow, we were stronger for it. Maybe this was the next step. Maybe it was time to fully embrace this new chapter. So I nodded, still unsure but curious. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." And just like that, everything changed again. If you had told me a few years ago that I'd be living with my wife and her long-term lover under the same roof, I would have laughed in your face. But here we are. Somehow it works in this weird, unexpected way. After that first night when the three of us got together, everything shifted again, and it felt like we'd unlocked a whole new level of understanding and connection. It wasn't just about the physical side of things, though. That part was intense. It was about the openness, the honesty. For the first time in decades, there were no more secrets. We slowly transitioned into this unconventional life. It wasn't like we just moved John in the next day or anything. We had a lot of talks, long, deep conversations about boundaries, feelings, and what this new dynamic would look like. We all had to figure it out together, piece by piece. But over time, it just made sense. John started staying over more often, and eventually, we talked about him moving in. It felt like the next logical step. The weird thing is, once we got past the initial awkwardness, everything kind of fell into place. It was strange at first, of course. I mean, how do you explain to people that you're living with your wife and her lover? But surprisingly, it felt right. We settled into this rhythm that I never would have imagined. We split the housework, we shared meals, and the three of us became this odd but functioning unit. Like a Swedish family, if you want to call it that. I realized something along the way. Love doesn't fit into neat little boxes. It's not as simple as just loving one person in one way. Lisa showed me that. I love her, she loves me, and she loves John too, but not in a way that takes anything away from what we have. It's different, and it took me a while to accept that. But once I did, it felt freeing. I grew to appreciate John too. He's not the enemy I thought he was. In fact, over time, we've developed our own friendship our own understanding of each other. We're both part of Lisa's life in different ways, and instead of competing, we've learned to complement each other. It's strange to say, but I trust him. We all know where we stand, and that's something I never thought I'd be able to say. The nights we share together are still the best of my life. There's this excitement, this spark, that never seems to fade. It's like every time the three of us are together, we're exploring something new, something deeper. It's weird, sure, but it's also beautiful. We're not hiding anything anymore. We're living in full honesty, and that's something I never knew I needed until now. We don't have it all figured out. No one does, but we've built something here that works for us. Something real, something based on trust and love. It's unconventional, it's messy, and it's definitely not for everyone. But it's ours, and we're happy. We love each other in this strange, complicated, beautiful way, and that's the only thing that really matters. So yeah, that's the end of the story. The three of us living together, loving each other, making it work in our own way. Not exactly what I imagined when I said I do 30 years ago, but life takes you places you never expect. And right now, I wouldn't change a thing. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.